designing my own circuit boards. So now I think I'll have 8 of them when I get the next order in. All my circuits are being done on circuit boards. So instead of having all those pieces of wire making the connections, they're already all done on the board. So all you're doing is looking for the part, you drop it into here where it says, and you solder it up. And then it's done. So a lot of the complication is removed from that. But as far as the soldering goes, the difficulties most people have with solder and getting the things is their joints are not good. They have cold solder joints, and one of the main reasons for that is equipment. You know, people are trying to solder. How many of you use a soldering gun? How many of you use the soldering iron? Take the soldering guns out and put them back with your plumbing stuff. Or with something else. But they don't, you know, you don't use a soldering gun on this stuff. You need a soldering iron. And I really recommend getting a station, something like this, that you can control the temperature on. This one's from Radio Shack. 65 bucks, I think, is what I paid for this at Radio Shack. The best investment I ever made. And then get the right solder. Flux core solder, this is 60-40, if you remember 60-40. And get fairly fine. This was the first spool I ever bought, and as you can see, it is almost gone. I'm just about to buy my next spool, and it will be even finer still than this. It really helps. Which is fine. It's actually even better, but 60-40 will work. You can find 60-40 at Radio Shack. I will probably go down to the other style next time I buy a spool. But get a good soldering iron. When you're soldering, a lot of people are afraid to push the temperature. They say, "Oh, you're running it at 680 or 700 degrees. You know, I'm gonna burn the bottom of my boards. I'm gonna burn up components." It's not totally how hot your iron is. It's how long you have your iron stuck onto your board. So if it's much more efficient to run a little higher temperature and have it be quick than run it at a colder temperature and sit there and sit there and sit there for waiting for that thing before your solder can flow. So don't be afraid to run it at 680, 670, 680, 700. For the big heavy components that suck a lot of heat, I'll run up to 750, 750 degrees. Because, you know, I want to get on the joint, heat it up, get away. And you'll have much less problem, it'll flow better. So, just a little primer. I know you guys all said you take the iron out, you clean it, okay? That's what the little sponge is for. It's not for your fingers. Thing's wet. I've gotten this wet twice already today. You know, clean your tip off, take a little bit of solder, and just put a little bit of solder, melt a little solder. It's called tinning your tip. Tin it up. When you put it up on a joint, you've got a wire sticking through here and you've got a little silver pad. By the way, the component goes on this side. The little wires go through this side. The silver part is where you try and solder to. Okay? Don't try and solder to the one that's got the silk screen that says your parts on it. The solder won't adhere to that. So make sure you get your board right side up. Put your soldering iron up on the pad, touching the pad, and up against the component. Take your solder a little bit, touch a little bit onto the back of it, and move it around to the front. Let it suck up. You'll see it all melt. It'll flow nice. It gets nice and silver. Pull your tip away. I was doing some soldering with Christy and showing her. I mean, it's done, 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 done. Done. That fast. So again, run it at the temp. It goes fast. Get it on there, flow it out, and then pull off the joint. And also, your solder always comes off the joint first, and then your iron gets pulled off. Okay? So when you get it done, you pull the solder off, leave it there for a split second, pull it off. Doesn't take much. Okay? That's my soldering primer. Any questions on that? You guys have to ask questions because I'm not that good. And besides, I need to take a drink every once in a while. So. No? I can send my stuff to you guys to have you guys solder it for me now? A couple other things I think are really important if you're going to solder. A couple things will make your life a whole lot easier. Clips. There's some components that you have to be really careful how much heat you put on them. So a little clip like this, you clip it onto it on the top of the board. It helps keep the heat from going into the component. So there's certain components, not a whole lot, but that comes in really handy. Little clips to hold it on, the components on. A couple tricks for actually soldering up components. People are always going, well, you know, how do I keep it on there? You know, I got to hold the component on, and I got to hold the solder, and I got to hold the soldering iron. You always build a board from the bottom up, so the shortest components, wire lengths and resistors go first, you know, and then as height increases, you put that next layer on. So, you know, if you put the resistors on, and now of course you have to tip this thing over to be able to solder the backside. One option is you can bend the pins, cross them, so that will hold the component in. I personally don't like that because if you get a whole bunch of resistors in, it's bad enough when you have a forest of wires sticking straight up, but when you start getting a whole forest of them and now they're vines going like this, it's hard to get your soldering iron in. And I'll lay out a lot of them at one time before I flip and do the backside, you know, do the soldering. So I kind of don't like that method. Another method is you put all your components on, you take something else, another board, you know, little piece of plywood, you know, whatever you got, non-conductive, put it up on here, gently tip the board over like this, lay it down on your bench. Now gravity holds everything together and you can do it. I don't like this method as much, although I do use it sometimes, because sometimes as I'm putting my soldering iron up against it, it starts to move around. I'm trying to hold this and get my solder in. But I know a lot of people like that method. It works, just doesn't work as well for me with a lot of stuff. My favorite way to do these things, I put components in, and this is my best friend. Blue painter's tape. It doesn't leave residue. I'll put all my resistors on, I'll stick a piece of blue painter's tape on, lay it down nice and flat, so everything, all my components are nice and tight to the board. Flip it over, use my other favorite soldering component, or tool. It's one of these vices. Put it in there. My board's held rigidly. All the parts are up tight against the board where I want them. And it's really easy to go through and solder, and everything is solid. And I'm not chasing my board across my bench. So blue painter's tape. I love it. It's my favorite way to do things. You're going to need a couple of vices. I like this one for holding boards. And they make a larger one too, but this size works for almost everything that we do. These are the helping hands from Harbor Freight. You know, they're like $8 or something with a couple alligator clips. You can use these for boards too. I don't like it as much, but I usually do it when I'm soldering wires together. So I can clip one on each side, and I push this out of the way. Put one on each side so I can solder up wires and heat my shrink tube up all at one time. So these are really useful. And if you're anything like me, you're going to need something like this. This is a solder sucker for when you make a mistake. Or when you let the magic blue smoke out of one of your components and you now have to replace it. You heat the joint up, you put this up against it, you push the little button, it sucks up the solder. Do that a few times, you can clean it up and get your component out. They also have something called solder wick. That looks like a ribbon, really heavy ribbon. Same thing, you heat it up, you put the solder wick up there, it sucks up the solder. Another option. One or the other, guaranteed sooner or later, you're going to need something like this. The other thing that a lot of people are really afraid of is getting a meter. You know, all these knobs and where do I turn it and what do I do with them. This is invaluable for if you're going to be doing any kind of circuit work, especially the mode that just tells you if you've got connectivity. Here the buzz, you like that buzz most of the time. Sometimes you don't. When I get done doing a board, I especially will check positive and negative and make sure that I don't have those two links somewhere, that I don't have a bad joint. Linking my positive and my negative together, you can smoke a board in a big hurry. So this is really handy. The other thing, a lot of times you'll buy kits, and they'll send the resistors and all loose, and they say put in the 47K resistors here, and they've got this little color code, and then put in these, these, and they'll have 6 or 8 or 10 different resistors. And if you're anything like me, even with glasses on, I can't read those stupid color codes. I can't tell blue from purple sometimes, and purple from violet. The thing is this big, and it's got 4 bars of color on it. So being able to go through with this and check the resistor to get its actual value so you can sort them correctly and put them in the right place. It's a lot quicker to do it with this and put it in right the first time than spend 8 hours troubleshooting why your board doesn't work. Take it out, replace it with the right one, go to Radio Shack, pay way too much money for the part, So spend a little time early when you're putting this together. It'll save a lot of headaches later. Same thing here when you're putting the components in. Take your time putting the components in. A lot of components, it doesn't matter which way. A resistor, you can put it in either way, doesn't matter. But some components like diodes kind of looks like a resistor. It's a little ceramic, tiny piece with a couple of wires coming out of it. They do have to go in one way or another, or one way. They have a little stripe on it. And usually you'll see, there's a diode here somewhere. When most of us make our boards, the resistor diagram on here is a little bit different. It shows where the stripe goes. Same thing if you're putting capacitors. Some capacitors, it doesn't matter. They're not, the polarity, you can go either way. Some of them will have the bigger stack capacitors. It'll have a stripe on one side denoting the negative side. It's got to go in one way. Usually it'll show on the board. LEDs, you guys have played with LEDs? Which is the positive side? Which leg is the positive side?
The longer one.
Which is the negative side? Well, if it's not the longer one, it's the shorter one. Also, LEDs, the negative side's got a flat side. Some of the LEDs, it's really hard to see, especially if you get into the little ones, the 3 millimeters and stuff. But it's got a flat side. So that's how, if you've got a board and you have to take an LED off, and now it's both of the legs are this long, and you don't have a long one and a short one, you want to reuse it, just look for the flat side, and that's the negative side of an LED. By the way, never hook an LED directly up to a battery. How many have done that? Good. I like to see that. If you haven't done it, you should do it at least once and see what magic blue smoke looks like.
Lights for a second.
Just for a second. Just a flash, and then it goes never to be shown, bright again. So that's kind of the assembly stuff. The one last thing that I want to show for a piece of equipment that I think is absolutely necessary, and I've convinced some of my buddies to get them. Again, I'm 54. I have to wear glasses to read, but I also use one of these. So when I'm soldering, I'm using both. It's amazing how many people screw things up just because they can't see it well enough. I had a friend of mine from Canada. We went back and forth. He was building one of my designs. Couldn't get it to work. Send me pictures. I couldn't really tell from the pictures. I fixed everything. I metered everything. All my joints are perfect. The second time. So finally I said, send me the board. So he sends me over the board. And I get the board, and I'm talking to my son. I'm unwrapping it from the box. And I take the board, and I go like this, and I go, oh, no wonder it doesn't work. He just couldn't see. He has now gone and bought one of these since then. And there were a half a dozen cold solder joints, and there was one joint that he never soldered. He had snipped the wire. It had that much wire poking through here, but it had no solder on it. I went out and soldered it up, put it in, works great. So the helping hands, they also make the desk lamp style with the big magnifiers. Those are great. But this is really fine detail work. You really, really need to be able to see, not guess.
Hey, Steve, for most people, or maybe some that don't know, why don't you explain what a cold solder joint is?
I should have brought pictures of that. Cold solder joint, when you look at a solder joint, it's supposed to be nice and shiny, and it's supposed to be kind of ramped down. If you have a big glob, round glob sitting on your component leg that's sticking up, that's not going to work. if you have a hole, if it sucks down and it's ratty and looks like the surface of the moon, you know, that's not going to work. So you want it nice and shiny, and you want it to slope back off. I also try, especially on some of the boards that have a little bigger holes, to get a little bit of that solder to suck up into the you can even see it through the top of the board, see it suck into there. But a cold solder joint, you know, just throwing solder on a component will not necessarily make an electrical connection between the component and the board. So there's a lot of great pictures on the internet to go and see what a bad joint looks like versus a good one. But you know, again, even putting a meter on it, you may put a meter on it and it may meter out right, but it's still not making that good connection with the board. Wanted to go over a little bit before we get into the actual control. Any questions on any of that?